Hi, I'm here to kind of inform and present some buttons from the Depression era. I am not an expert, and I do not pretend to be an expert on glass buttons, but I'll share with you the knowledge that I have. Of course, buttons have been evolving since 2000 BC, and you know they evolved in material and in makeup and in style. And in 1861, you know, when Queen Victoria's husband Albert passed, the buttons she had designed for her black mourning clothing were black jet. But black jet was so difficult and rare and expensive that the average person could not afford it. So in comes black glass. And black glass made its debut at that time, and it's been made since then by the millions. During World War II in 1939 and in 1945, the Germans and the Bohemians and the Polish and the French, they left their home countries to leave because of the Nazis invading Bohemia. And so they were the major glass manufacturers at that time. And so they had to leave with little material. So their factories were left. A lot of the blanks and things from their factories were lost, but and they were destroyed during the war. After Bohemia became Czech Republic, that was that allowed a lot of those people that were displaced to go back into the country. So the glass production began again. And the Depression glass era was around the 1920s to the 30s. And every one of the glass companies thought that it's not going to fly, colored glass. No, it won't, because crystal had been, you know, at its peak, and they made everything out of crystal, and crystal glass was, you know, the glass. But Depression glass really did become very, very popular. And it was popular for about, what, 10 years, 15 years? So they were wrong about that. I'm going to pass around some cards that have Depression glass on them. I'm going to pass around the black glass first, because this was the first glass. Now those are not Victorian. Some of them are in the 80s.
This is an old one. This is an old one.
Lots of times you can tell an old button by its shank on the back.
Right.
The back of old glass buttons are usually very crudely made. They kind of have lines in them, and they have like an edge around that hasn't been polished well, and they have self shanks. Metal shanks came in later. I didn't know, and I don't know, you guys are glass collectors, but Lalique, of course you know about Lalique Glass, which was made in France. They made a few buttons, and you can acquire a few Lalique buttons online today, but they're pretty scarce, and they're very pricey.
So what are these buttons made out
Black, they're all black glass.
of? Black glass, okay.
These are
And
luster,
black glass
silver luster.
was colored with ink.
With ink?
I didn't know that until I
Colored
got.
the black buttons with ink?
Well, they colored, when they made them, they colored the glass to make the black canes with ink. Now the glass canes came in all different colors. Green was made with chromium oxide, amber was iron and iron sulfide, and of course blue was cobalt oxide. And here are some blue ones, and here's red. And you have to remember that each one of those buttons was hand pressed by a person. That was before the Industrial Revolution. And then I'm going to pass around this, which is a description of the metal negatives or the molds that they used. And it shows here that each little man had set at a station. He had his own little fire kiln, and his glass rods were going in there and getting hot. And then he had the press, which was an iron little press, and he put the glass in there, press it down till it was molten, and then he would retrieve the glass rod and rotate. He had to rotate his rods, the glass, to keep them at a certain temperature, because they produced those glass buttons fast. In it went, down it went, up, the rod came over, and then they trimmed the edges, out it came, and flop, it went into a cooling bin. And then they were picked up and placed by hand on a sanding machine, which sanded all the edges, and polishing machines. So those buttons were intensively handmade.
Were they
And
expensive?
it took a lot of time.
Were they
Then,
expensive?
after it was cooled, some of the holes were drilled into them. If they didn't have a shank on the back, and they were drilled, the holes were drilled in. Some of the buttons were blown into the molds with a blower, and then they would have a self shank, which would be a little curve, and then they would poke a hole through that while the glass was still warm. So there was a lot of handling of just one single button. And then if it was painted or gold or polished, finished with another finish like Aurora Borealis, that was put on that button. Then it was put again into trays and fired again into another oven.
Is this depression glass?
And then, pardon?
Could I have your
Is this
attention,
depression
please?
glass?
If you
That's
have not
depression,
picked up
yeah.
your prizes yet from the silent auction, or your purchases rather from the silent auction, please do so. Again, if you have items to pick up and pay for at the silent auction, please do so.
Those factories, those small ones, the glass factories, not only made buttons, they made other types of glass. But one large factory in the 30s and the 40s, the name was H&J Glass and Elegant Glass, and they were in Czechoslovakia. And they had like 20 people in this one factory. And in 1919, the factory was where Leo Popper, it was an American factory in New York City, and 20 people were pressing, and 20 to 25,000 buttons a week were produced.
And these are Leo Popper buttons, and they have what is called a key shank, which you can't see what's on the card, but
And those men worked 10 to 12 hours a day.
they were what?
They worked 10 to 12 hours a day,
Elegant.
and their salaries were very meager. It was very hot. It was not,
So I suppose those are very
comfortable
expensive.
place to work.
Those are probably
So what
very
kind of
expensive.
shapes did they have on them?
A key shank, it's a piece of metal that represents like the end of a key that has a hole, it's kind of rounded. And I think you can see it if you tip it to the side. Can you see that shank on the bottom one? You can take it off.
No. Oh, yeah, okay.
And Leo Popper buttons have gone up in price.
What price are we thinking about?
Huh?
What price would something like that be
Well,
currently?
$20 and up
$20 per
button.
button?
per button. Yeah.
So how much
And
did
so-
they cost when they were made?
Oh, I do not know.
Oh.
I couldn't find that. I looked under Leo Popper. I knew he was an American glass designer, but I couldn't find that. I suppose if,
I'm gonna check eBay for
I
you.
don't know. But,
Are they still made, or these are just
No.
antique?
no,
permanent?
they're not made
They
anymore.
don't make any.
There are some American studio button makers that started in the 20s and ran through about the 50s. They made, what are these called? Paperweight buttons. And they have a distinctive top. They have a clear dome of glass on the top. And then each designer, they had their own type of shank and back, but they're made with a cane glass put on a rod, just kind of like the regular paperweights are made, glass paperweights, only these are just little miniatures. But a paperweight always has a dome of clear glass to be called a paperweight button.
Okay, we have them all the way from 99 cents to $58.
So what
And
are we
those are
looking
the-
for now? Oh,
But some of them go for more than that. If they're large Leos, which are kind of hard to find.
And the
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mom, did you see 'em? No.
But then there's also two-piece paperweights, which are smaller, and they were made and then hand-painted on the inside, where those used glass for the design. These were hand-painted, and then a little glass shank was glued on. And it took a lot of people to make a lot of buttons to make a salary when you were making little tiny things like that. It was very labor intensive, and that's why the United States did not really develop much glass buttons factories, is because in Europe it is so much cheaper, the labor, and
We
cheaper
did lots
products.
of pearl,
Pardon?
oyster shell buttons.
Yes, oyster
Yeah.
shell, they were making oyster shell buttons the same time as depression glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there were lots of those factories here in the United States.
That's right.
They dredged the rivers for mussels and clams. That's another interesting story. In Winfield, there used to be a button factory. It burned to the ground some years after, but they would come in and dredge the river, bring up those shells, wash them, pop them out, pop them open, throw the meat out, wash them, dry them, and then they would go to a little shop which had a drill press, and they would take those shells and they'd drill circles down into the shells, and then they would slice them, and then they would decorate them, either carving or whatever. But
And speaking about prices of buttons, in the 16 and 1700s, if you owed a gentlemen were the ones that wore the expensive buttons. And if they owed a debt, they could give a button to pay for that debt.
well, a lot of those buttons too were made by jewelers, and they used precious stones back in that time. So,
And the gay knighties imitate those,
yes,
I guess.
yeah, they did. But there's a glass factory, and here are some clear glass, depression glass buttons. Forgot to pass those around. And then here are some newer Czech buttons. There are Czech buttons being made today.
Here's some of the older.
Yeah. They are being made in Czechoslovakia in a town named Nardia.
The ones you have in your hand?
Yes.
Purchase.
And there are like 4 men that are doing that now. And they are getting up in years, and when they retire, younger people don't want to take on this time-consuming, low-cost or low-salary, job. So when they are gone, this art is going to be completely a history.
Are they breakable?
These two buttons here are uranium glass. They glow in the dark, or a black light glow.
Are these your personal collection? I know she brought some.
Mine and Kay's, yes. Yeah.
Where are you from?
I'm from here, Wellington.
Okay.
I live in
I'm
Wichita.
from here. Kay's from
Wichita.
Kay's from Wichita. We both belong to the,
South Central Kansas Button Club.
yeah,
So
and
these are
the-
still being
We have a
made.
monthly meeting in Derby at the library, and we have members in Wichita and Newton and Wellington. We had a lady that came from Augusta, and there's a show every year in Salina about the weekend before
Of
Easter.
buttons?
Mhm.
yes.
That tray right there that has the labels on it was prepared for competition,
Which one?
the black glass.
This is,
This is like
That,
this, yeah.
that
No,
black
it's the
glass.
black glass.
Oh, the black
And
glass.
the National Button Society has what they call the Blue Book, and it's like a Bible for button collectors.
Really? Yes. Buttons are in,
You can
how
s-
many classifications? 9,
I know, I've read
No,
about
no.
it in my Threads
25.
magazine.
25?
They've classified everything, and they've broken down each material into, that one is only mechanical black glass, and it has to be labeled with the number correctly.
Oh, my.
And you can compete. You enter a tray of your glass buttons to compete against somebody else who enters a tray, which is, yeah, it's, buttons is they're really very fascinating.
I think.
My father was
These
a
are
button
beautiful.
collector
And what
and had
timeframe?
a huge collection.
Those are
He did it
modern
later in
buttons.
life, and so we as children were never involved in it, but
Where do
They
you
need
buy these
classified
kind of buttons?
Division
we
1
inherited
is
his
Oh,
collection.
uh-huh.
And I was
1918,
able
and
to
Division
find
2 is
a button collector who bought the entire
Division.
collection.
Oh,
Division
wow.
9,
That was a
if you
wonderful
compete
thing
into
for both of
Division
us
9, it
because
can be any
she
age.
was thrilled and we were happy for it to have a good home, so.
Where do you find the buttons?
I still have one card, Black
Garage
Carnival.
sales,
Yep.
estate
Glass
sales,
Oh, okay.
so, which I might
Dealers.
just donate to the museum.
Every year there's a national show. This year it's in Appleton, Wisconsin. We went to Denver last year,
That's neat.
so.
Yeah, most of these buttons you have to acquire from a dealer who has acquired them from other individuals who have sold their buttons, you know, and
Just like
expired.
I sold my
Yeah,
father's
exactly,
collection.
exactly,
Yeah.
same thing. And used to be you could go to a flea market or, you
There's-
know,
there's a
auction,
couple
you
in-
know, an antique place, and you could pick up buttons, but they're getting to be nice ones, very scarce that way. You can't.
There's a
seem to
couple
find
in
them.
Lyons, the Williamsons, and they put on a quarterly online auction. It's called Armchair Auctions. And if you pay $15, then you can bid. If you pay $20, they'll send you a
It's
lovely
it's
glossy
amazing. You
brochure
would-
showing every button with the description. So they had, I think, a button
Yeah,
at
they're
the
hot.
last auction sold for over $1,000.
Oh,
Yeah,
Because I've got
every
one
kind of
that's
material,
buttons.
metal, has been produced in a button. I mean, there's not anything out there that hasn't been produced. After the Depression glass became, kind of waned a little bit, the colored glass, plastics were invented. And that's what really kind of killed the glass button.
You want to talk about the gay 90s?
Yeah. Yeah, the gay 90s were in the 1920s to the 1940s. And, but they incorporated
I thought
metal.
they were the 1890s,
What did I say?
1920. But that's okay. I'm just,
Yeah, I thought
Oh,
that's
that's
why
why
they
they
were.
1920 to
90s.
1940.
okay.
I don't know.
I always thought they were gay 90s because it was the 1890s during
I
the
don't-
Edwardian era.
I don't know, but that's what I got off.
Okay.
But anyway, they were metal and they were set. Metal,
This one is back marked Czechoslovakia.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Heart attack.
I'm not sure.
Well, they were coat and cloak buttons.
Oh, yeah.
Did you see these? These are gorgeous. It's like jewelry.
Yeah, my mother was born in the
In fact,
early 1900s.
The one on the bottom, the blue, on the back says Geschützt.
Here, I'm gonna
I
let
think
you
that means patent
look at
pending
this. This
in
kind
Germany.
of, this shows the iron
And if you
blanks.
have a back
And
mark
that's how they
button,
were
that's also
stored.
a point.
And there's the canes going into the little kiln.
And the kind of shank and the.
All those judged.
But it's so amazing to me that each one of these buttons was handmade and hand polished by an individual. And then they went to, were sold to Garment District in New York. And then they carded them with their logos on them. And lots of the cards had, I'll have it. What did I do with that? Here it is.
Be sure to tell them about the patents.
Oh, I will.
Okay.
I'm going to tell them about
Said,
the
just jump
two.
in that time.
Here is a card that is,
Isn't that something?
Okay.
And some,
I have a lot of buttons on
Yeah,
cards.
some people
Keep
collect-
them on the cards.
Um,
Make them
if
look-
they're a good, yeah,
If it's a good card.
some people collect them on the cards, collect the cards with
Mm-hmm.
them.
More valuable if they're on their original cards.
I would
Well,
think so.
Some of the cards are really artistic.
Yes.
And so if you've got a really good one, you're gonna keep it on the card.
They're little
there's some
girls.
here that are newer glass, and it says Germany, U.S. zone. That's where they were made, but they came to the United States imported. And then these
Everybody's attention,
companies
please. Silent auction bidder
put
numbers.
their names on them, and they were hand sewn
53,
onto the cards. So that was another
39,
cottage
19, and
industry.
63. If you
Women
would please go to the silent auction and
children
pick
were
up your
hand
glass.
sewn buttons on the
Bidders.
cards. Same way
Bidder
with
numbers
curling.
32, 53, 39, 19, and 63. If you would please go to the silent auction to pick up your glass.
Did you win anything?
Well, plastic was invented in 1918, Bakelite was.
This is-
But
this
it
is
was,
Bakelite.
but it wasn't really utilized into buttons until about the 20s. So, and then there was casing, catlin, resin, and, well, I guess it was the 40s is when they introduced.
These are beautiful.
Bakelite.
Yeah, Bakelite
Yeah.
is usually about the 40.
Yeah, and it was so much cheaper than glass, and the same way with lucite. Here's plastic lucite. And they were more laundry friendly.
How would you figure that out, looking at buttons?
Well, I have no idea. In 1940, nylon was invented, and the same year nylon buttons came out, nylon stockings came out.
Oh.
So they both entered, yeah. I thought
Oh,
that was
yeah, I have
interesting.
some supporters in my jewelry box, and I've had younger friends that go, what on earth is that? Well,
There were
it
several
helped my
American,
nose in nursing school.
Like this, that has.
now this one says West
This
Germany.
is,
Those are the buttons.
this is designed under glass. This is called.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the 43rd Annual National Impression Glass Association's Convention Show and Sale. Please be sure to register for our hourly door prizes. If you have not registered for our prizes, we ask that you do so at the registration table located at the entrance to the show. We are again this year offering our special juniors prize. So parents, if you've brought your kids with you to the show, please be sure to register them for the special juniors prize. Also, we are offering again a members only prize for NDGA members. If you are not a member of the NDGA and would like to join, please see the club representative at the NDGA club table
Yes.
located next to the entrance to the show.
And those are made
Lunch
in
today is
Brooklyn.
provided by the Pig
They came
Shack
in about
Barbecue, and all dessert purchases are benefiting the
18,
Wellington Area Muscular Dystrophy
19.
Association.
Is that what you were talking about? Those right there?
This hour's door prize winners
Yeah, after
are
1918.
Caleb James of Andover, Kansas, and our junior prize winner
So
is
they
James
were
Pattison. Caleb of
rival for,
Andover,
Glass.
Kansas, and James Pattison, you are this hour's door prize winners. If you would please go to the registration table located near the entrance to the
American
show.
button manufacturers, they were mostly, they made brass buttons because of the war uniforms. They made brass, and they made togwa nut, which was a nut which was imported from South America. And they made, you know, the pearl industry was another industry that came on during the Depression. Colt manufacturer that makes guns. There's a deal there of Colt buttons. They came out and made plastic buttons for a while. These are Colt buttons.
Oh, my goodness.
And they have a shank that looks kind of like an hourglass.
That's how you identify them.
Oh,
Oh, I
man.
see.
John A. How do you pronounce that? Decnatal?
Yeah, technical.
Decnatal. There we go,
However you
Decnatal.
want to say it.
He was an immigrant from the Netherlands, and he came to New York City in about 1880 and produced lots of black glass in the United States. But he also had a glass-related factory that produced jewelry and other kinds of decorative art glass. And he studied in France. That's where he studied his glass making.
So would you tell these by the shank?
Yeah.
You want to take one off?
No, I see it.
That it looks like an hourglass? Can you tell?
Uh-huh.
Of course, the sew-throughs, I don't know how you tell
And
those.
John Decnatal, he was a patent.
Did you get to see it?
He applied for a patent on a glass shanks in the 1940s. And there were like 1,500 patents that were applied for in the 40s that were related to black glass buttons. And I thought that was amazing. And a patent at that time cost $30, which is equivalent to $700 to $1,000 now today. For, but he had this glass factory. He also produced window glass, stuff like that was used. But
There's a Colt button called the Rouge button, and it has a lady's head on it, and you can it's a button, but you can unscrew it, and there's rouge on the inside. I just recently bought one of those. I hadn't had
Did you?
one.
I don't have one either, but I'm plastic Colt buttons. I'm not. That isn't one of my favorite, types of buttons. I have too many favorites. So,
How long have you girls been collecting?
I've been collecting about 20 years.
I think I started in the middle 90s. I had an antique shop in Hill City with some ladies, and I kept getting buttons and, stuff that you buy, and I didn't know anything about them. And there was a dealer that she was an auction friend. And I asked her about pricing them because I knew she had a shop, and she said, well, we've got a button club in Overland, come up and join us. And I thought, a button club? And I went up there and I got hooked on names like Fish-Eye Pearls and Moonglows and Twinkies.
There's a collector's club or a support group for just about anything you want
Yes,
to
there
name.
is.
Yeah, I know. That is so true. That is so true.
Were there any special buttons made during the Art Deco period?
Yes, yeah, there were.
Do you have any of those?
I have some at home.
Do you?
Yeah.
So
I
do
really
I owe
do.
you or you owe me?
Yeah, they were mostly colored glass, silver and gold embellishments. And, they were, that's a whole nother
One little thing.
Yeah, you can go on with, we can go on with that. I mean,
There are
there's,
buttons made out of rubber.
yeah.
And they're like, say, patent,
The-
patent 1880. And bone and horn. Any material, paper even.
Paper.
Any material you think
Yeah,
of.
and there are, yeah, I mean, it just goes on and on. That's about all I have for you today.
Well, thank you very much.
So,
It's
I hope-
Very interesting. Thank you.
It
Oh, man.
stirred up a little interest in buttons.